March 14th, 2018 Charter Review Committee. All members are in attendance. Thank you all. Any public comment? Minutes approval. Michael has sent out the minutes earlier today. I also have copies here if anyone wants these. Anybody have any issues with the 3 minutes? January 10th, January 24th, or February 28th? Is there a motion to approve them?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, great. Michael, you'll be able to post those with the clerk. Okay, first item, review survey feedback. There were 2 separate sets of surveys. The first one did consider open versus representative town meeting and time and date of the meeting. So both of the first, that had 82 responses. But for the town meeting, 89% supported maintaining the open town meeting and 9 said consider changing. They didn't say definitely change. So one of the things that was raised, it said we never officially took a vote on representative versus open. We sort of were having some opinion, but want to get feedback. So once we go through all the surveys, that will be one of the votes we'll take tonight officially. Question 2, time of meeting. Maintain the current regular town meeting all day Saturday, 27%. Saturday meeting with a time certain end, moving to the following Monday, 30%. Maintain the Saturday meeting with a second regular meeting in the fall, 43%. And switch the Saturday meeting to a weeknight, 27%. And other specified was about 6%. Do you know what the others were? I think when I looked at some of...
I think that just went into the comments. I think that's where people make comments.
Yeah, I think some of that went to the concept of what a meeting is and how it's run and how long, when things should end, other things like that.
And I'll add that people could check more than one thing in that.
Right. And our current draft does a combination. It maintains the Saturday, but also adds a second regular town meeting in the fall. The second survey had 211 responses. Board of Selectmen changed to Select Board. Keep Board of Selectmen 15%, changed to Select Board 35%, and I could support either 49%. Question 2, town clerk elected versus appointed. Town clerk should be elected 17%, town clerk appointed 75%, and I could support either position 8%.
Can you just repeat that one? I'm sorry.
Sure. Elected 17, appointed 75, and support either 8%. Term limits for elected office. I like the idea of term limits, 62%. I don't think term limits are necessary, 16%, and I could support either position, 22%. So why don't we go right to the open town meeting versus representative town meeting?
My position remains the same, that until we've tried to fix the problem of attendance and really give it a go, I think I would have to say that I think we should keep the open town meeting. And then see what happens this time around, maybe 10 years from now when somebody's sitting on the charter review.
That's true. So is there a motion to effect to...
Motion to keep the town meeting as listed.
Is that something that we need to take a vote on?
We
since
just
we're
want
not
to go on
changing it?
record because I'm starting to build the report we're going to do when we talk about things we considered and didn't change. we want to have a record of that as well.
Then I would second that motion.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, unanimous on that. Town meeting schedule. The current draft has a regular town meeting in
A second time.
spring and a second town meeting in the fall, both to be set by time and date to be set by bylaw. So that, by us saying we're definitely going to have 2 regular town meetings, that sets the part there. We still have the flexibility by bylaw to move things to a time certain, end at noon or 1, move to a Wednesday. It doesn't say which day of the week in the charter. So that gives, I think, gives us the most flexibility.
Move to make the change to 2 town meetings per year as listed.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Select Board versus Selectmen. So I happen to be in the South Coast this weekend in the town of Dartmouth, and they had signs out, vote for Select Board, Tom so-and-so. It was Select Board. It's like, oh, well, there's a town that had it. And then I looked up and I happened to look at another charter, that town had a Select Board. So you don't pay attention until you start thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't really care, but I'm happy to make a motion to go with what seems to be the trend, and make a motion that we change the name of the body to the Select Board.
Second.
Discussion.
I'll just throw out there, this wouldn't, I would say yay, but there won't be anything in this that would cause it to fail. I think it would be pretty well received. That would be my only just pause to say, wait, let's make sure that,
My
you know,
sense from the survey was that of people who were interested in it, who saw the survey, was that they would support it.
and I agree that I don't see it being a problem, but as we go through and do this, we
Yeah.
want to make sure that for every single one of those, that's a consideration.
I agree. Other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Town clerk appointed. So in addition, at our last meeting, we asked to get job descriptions. Sent 2 job descriptions out, and then I was looking at several other towns, and what I found out was that the Town Clerks Association worked to come up with a typical job description, because the reality is, for most towns, unless you give them additional duties, there are certain duties, so the language became pretty standard across the state. So, comments on elected versus appointed?
Is there anything in that standard across the state that differs from our description of the work, regardless of whether it's appointed or?
No,
Okay.
no. Even the elected ones had the same language.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand the fear of having someone run for this critical position without having the requisite skills. But I still would say that it's served us well for all these years, and I don't currently see a need to change it. So I think it's good to have an employee that answers directly to the town people. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, I think it's also important that when you have someone that's essentially not reporting to the town manager or anyone else directly, that it gives a voice for dissent. So I plan on voting no for this motion.
Okay, other comments?
I'm going to say that I'm also voting no, and this would be my biggest concern for any other work that's happened and anything we might accomplish by updating it. I think that this one issue would be something that, as it goes out in the community, could cause charter changes to fail, potentially. In terms of the data, and I think I've been pretty open about data in the past, there's nothing scientific about any of these polls either, because you could take more than once. One person could take it 10, 15 times, depending upon what kind of IP addresses they had access to. You could take it from outside of Lunenburg. So I certainly don't want to look at any of this data as like a definitive idea of what people are actually going to feel if they find out we're making a big change. I think it's good to get a little bit of feedback, but then, a lot of my background is in clinical data and everything, and even the amount of people, and as really, so there's really nothing scientific about this little piece of information to help us think that it would be favorable or unfavorable. So we just have to go on basically discussing it and thinking whether or not there'd be a ripple effect, because it's a big change in terms of how people will receive a position, going from the people choosing, from a town manager choosing, and people don't even choose the town manager. So you're getting further and further away from accessing, the role of I guess, of a voter.
Well, let me ask this going forward. If we were to take a vote tonight and the draft was to be included in the warrant, and we have a public hearing at some point, at the time of the town meeting, can the committee make a recommendation other than what's in there to amend it prior to a vote on it?
The answer is yes. The theory would be is that we want to come up with the final draft, which is not final, but the final draft tonight, and then we put it out there, and that at any time before town meeting, and the idea would be is that if we choose to change it after we got it out in the charter, we would do another public hearing process, get that out there, and then actually go in with the proposed change, and not so therefore we actually know what we're doing before everybody knows what we're going to do when we walk in that door. The answer is yes.
Okay, so at this point then, I'm assuming that we will be scheduling a public hearing on the
Yes.
charter. Okay. Because because my sense then would be to go ahead and include the change. And then because I don't think we raise any interest in discussing it if we don't include the change. And then if at a public hearing, there seems to be a lot of stir and drink, that maybe at that point we can make a decision to change it. But my inclination would be to vote for the change anyway. But I also think that since there's also another path, I'm more inclined to do that.
So you can change up until town meeting?
We can, as long as the subject matter is not dramatically different than what's there. So like, for instance, if we put out there the thing that we have now and then went into town meeting and included ranked choice voting, that's adding something completely new, and that's really not notifying the voters. In our report, in the charter, we will show that it's actually elected, and then you've got the ability to make changes before it.
I would feel more comfortable trying to make it feel solid before and not making changes closer to a town meeting. So that
Right.
people know what they're looking at and what is going to be what they receive there. Any last minute changes, if I were on the other side of it, I would feel uncomfortable about it.
I agree with you.
So I share Katie's concern about this one item sinking the whole charter effort. Personally, I favor the position being appointed. I think in this day and age, the need for a trained professional to do this job is more appropriate than having it elected. But I worry that if this is in the proposed charter changes and we haven't had adequate time to hear from the public, that there's opportunity to waver between now and town meeting, and I don't think that's a good path for us to be on. I guess that raises a question, and maybe it's a question of order or point of order. We're taking some votes this evening. We have not yet had our public hearings. I guess in my mind, I thought we were going to have the public hearings before we took our official vote. I understand the timeline that we're up against, and the snow days that we've had haven't helped, but I'm a little bit concerned about publishing a warrant without having had public hearings and having an item that is potentially controversial as part of that.
So what my understanding all along was that we actually have to give a recommended product to the public. And ideally, we would have had a recommended product, had a public hearing, then vote before the charter. The reality is, unless we schedule a meeting next Tuesday during the snowstorm. We're in that have enough public that's not going to be able to do that. At the same time, I hear what you're saying. I think that this is the time for us to make the best recommendation with the understanding that the current town clerk has announced that she is not running for re-election. So it is not a referendum on her, which we never wanted it to be. I think that, town meeting, how do you project town meeting? But based on a lot of what town meeting has done recently, I can see it going both ways.
So without taking us too far off topic, what happens if, let's say, doesn't matter which way we propose it to go, what if it does in fact sink the charter effort? What then happens with the charter? It gets voted down.
Yeah, and
What next?
we could reconvene the selectmen, or there has to be a charter review commission every 10 years. There can be one in between. So if we went to town meeting and it was turned down, we could go back and say, all right, we're going to come back. We've heard you here in public hearing was this way, town meeting went this way, it went down for this or for other reasons. We can then ask everybody on the committee to stay on for another year, reconsider it, and try to get everything else through, except for that part.
Well, I've already expressed my support for this change, so I don't want to waste your time by going through it again. But I do want to talk about the history of the last charter, which was that everything got voted in except the change. So it didn't sink
This
the charter.
change was proposed?
Yes, 10 years ago, it was proposed to change the clerk, and because it became contentious around the current clerk, it was voted down. The rest of the charter was approved.
But that can't happen.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I thought that couldn't happen.
So are you saying at town meeting, the charter committee changed it?
Yeah.
Actually,
it
must
wasn't-
have been after town meeting because it didn't get approved till October of '09.
It was a subsequent meeting.
So they went to the annual meeting and then they went to the fall
Right.
meeting.
So it got voted down in the spring,
And then a special town meeting.
and then they removed it.
And in a special town meeting, it was approved.
But what
Okay.
they did is they made the treasurer collector appointed.
Right.
They eliminated that elected position.
I'm confused. I do know that we have to have, the warrant closes next Thursday, a week from
Right.
tomorrow. What I'm not sure of is where do we plan this public hearing to happen?
That's what that's on the agenda to talk about what we're going to
That
do.
would
But I think it has a lot
Right.
It has a lot to do with this discussion, I think.
But it would also be, it would have to be between the warrant closing and the May meetings.
Oh, yeah, it was going to be,
So if
it was going to
we-
be sooner than later.
So if we choose, let's hypothetically say we choose to include making the clerk an appointed position. And we say, yeah, it could sink the charter, but it's important enough, we're gonna do that. And we have a public hearing sometime between when the warrant's printed, when the warrant's closed and the town meeting, and all hell breaks loose at the public hearing, and we decide that we wish we had changed our mind. What happens?
We can do it at the public hearing or immediately thereafter.
We can vote to make an
We could
amendment.
vote
We
to
can vote to
amend it.
change the thing, and then, and that's why what I would want is I would want the public hearing in the early part of April, which then gives a full month before town meeting to actually have the ability to market what it is. It's if we keep it or we don't keep it, and we say, here's what the charter is, because that's the outreach part.
Okay, if that's the case, I guess I feel strongly enough about the duties of town clerk being so specific that I would even take it so far as to say if it sinks the charter, so be it, it's that important. But if we have an opportunity to say, gee, we had a public hearing and it really confirmed what we what we saw, and I agree with Ms. Adams, this isn't scientific, it's the best we got right now.
It's an
But
indication.
we did a straw, we have a majority vote. You know, we're gonna do it again tonight. We have some data on this, and we will have a town meeting. I think it's important enough. It's probably the most controversial, but also the most important change we're making.
And I think that if we don't vote to put it in, then it's moot. And then it just becomes moot, because then after the public hearing, I don't think it would be,
It'd be
Well,
tough.
somebody could raise it and make an issue of it and sink the charter, even if it's not in there.
The other thing is, you know, there's no guarantee that the people that come to the public hearing are the same people that go to town meeting.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's often the case.
there's a
Talk to
long
the
time
planning,
between the two.
talk to the planning board. I mean, how
Yeah.
many people go to zoning hearings and then you go to town meeting, a whole different group of people, and that's what town meeting is for.
Right.
Is the people who show up.
Well, I would like to pose something, because I feel like we're going dancing around it a little bit, but we know it's controversial, and then we're not really talking about why. And I think it's because it takes away some of what is government and turns it into more of a business. And it becomes very philosophical, that it's more efficient to have an appointed town clerk if you think of it as running a business. But if you get really philosophical about government, then you would always defer to the people. And I think the people are the ones who showed a town meeting and voted in or out. And you basically have to explain to the people who have the opportunity to get rid of it why you're taking it from them. So it's really the legislative body there that has to choose to take some rights away from themselves.
right.
And I'd add that I read a couple years back, and I wish I had this information with me before referring to something that I can't back up with, hey, here's where it's at. But I read something a few years back about in town governments and the rate of employment for minorities throughout town governments, and it's extremely low. And one of my questions would be, with changing this to an elected or appointed position, how would one get those requisite skills in order to be viable for that job? And does that picture look different by demographics than what it would if it was just an open position for elected office? And so I wondered, and that brings up the question of, what is every other town in this state doing? And if you're going to come here to be a town clerk, that presumably you would have received that experience somewhere else. And how did you get that job to begin with? Was that based on merits, or was it based on other factors? So I think that we open ourselves up to negative potential, negative energy, I guess, negative outcome. And I don't know if there's really any change in the outcome. I mean, I think we can look back on the history of Lunenburg, the recent history of Lunenburg, and say that we've been served well by our town clerks. And going into the future, you know, I think it's important to keep critical jobs open. I mean, you can run for selectman, which has a lot of responsibility. You can be on a finance committee, you can be on the planning board, and none of these jobs require you to have an ounce of experience.
They're also not paid.
They're also not paid. They are, that's true.
So
But their policy, but the reason is their policy
Their
setting
policy
jobs.
makes correct jobs. They're not, the Board of Selectmen require that the town manager create a budget. The Board of Selectmen themselves are not experts in creating a budget. They're there as policymakers to oversee the budget and to recommend the budget and to oversee the town manager. Similarly, the town clerk is a technical job. It has a skill set that's necessary, and it's not a policy-making job. It follows regulations. It's a job that requires some expertise in information technology that not everybody has. It's a job that requires an ability to read and interpret regulation. It has a customer service aspect to it, in the fact that they're a direct public interface, probably the most public interface in town, and it's a technical job. So I think we've all made our opinions known. Unless anybody else has got anything else to say, I'm ready to propose making a
I
motion.
think I'd like to add in a little more to the discussion, in the sense that the town clerk also is the primary person who's in charge of maintaining elections and maintaining that process. And I think that's one thing that attracts me to thinking of it as an elected position, is again sort of keeping some process with the people. If it's appointed by a town manager, for example, in our current circumstance, she's not from Lunenburg, she's been here a year. Now you're giving the right to somebody to appoint somebody to this all-important job who may not know the community as well as the community itself. And just thinking of having somebody who maintains and runs elections and that process being more answering to the people of whom it's serving, it just makes me more comfortable. Not with who's here now or who's here later, but just in sort of the philosophy of government.
2 points. If this person is running the elections, I believe in a couple of elections ago, there was an issue with someone running the elections. And that was taken to court, or a lawyer was involved, right? There was there are very specific things. As an appointed position, is it the select men board that approve,
The ratify.
ratify it?
Town manager.
So the town manager can appoint anyone from Nome, Alaska, but it's the select board that says, no, that person is from Nome, Alaska, we want someone within our area. So I think there is a check for that. And then I would bring up the thing where if we have an elected official running the elections, I'm not sure of all those.
There's also another piece to the election, which is that there are actual, what do they call them, commissioners? I can't remember the name of them. They're actually
Registrars.
registrars, who are actually the ones that are physically responsible for, ensuring the record keeping of the election.
And again, the job of the clerk is the technical one, to know the rules and regulations
Right.
of election.
Right.
And it's probably better that that person's impartial, as
Right.
opposed to knowing the.
The registrars are appointed by the Board of Selectmen, and the clerk oversees the job of the registrars.
And then the other question that I would have would be, why would this be the only town position that would require residents?
Because of the election part, you actually have to have the town clerk be an elected official. Excuse me, a registered voter.
A registered
It has to
voter?
be a registered voter, so they actually have to live in town and be registered to vote in order to be in the polls, be behind things and other things like that.
I feel like in and of itself, it stays a bit political, because everything is.
Right, it does.
I don't think you escape it, but you take it from the people.
Well, I think, but it also, I think on a day-to-day basis, and that's where it becomes an issue for, okay, so somebody new is gonna come into this position. And somebody's gonna have to make sure that this person fulfills all of the duties that are required of them. And who's gonna do that if the next time that this person is brought before the town is 3 years down the road in an election? So so there's a part of it that because of the nature of the changes in the position, whether it's the open meeting law, making sure people are following that, staying up to date on what's going on with Mass General laws while doing all of the record keeping for the town, doing all the licensing that gets done. It's just like, again, like we had an issue come up this week just with meeting posting, and I think a lot of it is because there are very few positions in town that have to wear as many hats at the same time and respond like that to requests. So there's a particular skill set that has to be available. But, I mean, and again, to me, I can understand that there will be people who might not want to see this change. But I would still support putting it in so that we can at least get to the point of discussing it. And then if we end up having to take it out, I can support that too. But if we don't even bring it forward, then we're going to be, again, 10 years from now in the same place. And given that most other communities are moving this way, and that seems to be the trend, I don't see a problem with making this move. But and again, I also have to go back to, I'm not a town girl, I grew up in cities. It's like, this never happened.
As one of the 3 town clerks over the last 63 years, I mean, we had some longevity here. The reality is, if there was an issue, the only way to remove the person or deal with it on a personal basis would be through recall. And that would be very unlikely to have a recall election for a personnel issue that you really don't think the person should be fired, but they should be improved. And I'm not talking about any specific incidents within the last 66 years, but the fact is that this position's duties really call for it to be an employee and not an elected official.
I'll make a motion to put in the changes
As a
as put.
Second?
Now we can have discussion.
Well,
Robert's rules.
right, and I'm flexible on that one thing. Any discussion that hasn't already been raised before? All those in favor of making the town clerk appointed within this draft, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so we have two,
Myself.
with Michael and Katie. And per our charter that we determined, we list who votes for and who votes against.
Indeed, that's been missing for decades.
Now, what
That is why I
actual
think-
wording changes as a result?
So
of that?
what happens is that instead of, we will move this position to the town manager's appointment ratified by the selectmen. And we will,
It'll show up in the town manager's
under the
portion.
manager portion.
It'll be deleted as its own portion and
Yeah.
become within the town manager's
Which
portion.
then raises a question, because in the town clerk section, you change the language to, in the event that this position becomes appointed, we would add the following language.
That,
Where are you adding that?
so, that would be under the appointment process of the town
Okay,
manager.
so it won't be where it currently is sitting
I did.
at 312.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. So that's clerk. Next one, term limits for elected office.
I just have one question.
Yes.
Is there a reason why we didn't do appointed?
Appointed.
Like, basically, we should have
Term limits for
term
appointment?
limits for appointments for a particular position? So that, you know, like Mark doesn't have to feel guilty if he doesn't want to come back to finance committee?
We could put that in.
Interesting enough, if it's an appointed position, in effect, the appointing authority can determine whether term limits are appropriate or not.
Right.
So it's almost a moot point. There's nothing to prevent them from having term limits.
And now there's a
Or-
process where there's actually, in reappointments, is a process in place to actually look at
Not for
it.
us.
Oh, because it goes to the
But there's
monitor.
still an appointing authority.
Right.
Do we get reappointed every 3 years, or do we just get left on?
Oh, no, you
You
get
actually
reappointed.
officially get reappointed.
Well,
You have
so
to
that
apply
group
for
meets-
reappointment.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize that that group met.
Yeah, so I don't know that it's really necessary to do that for
Okay.
appointed positions.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So comments on term limits?
Have we had problems in the past with,
Some people would say yes, that there have been various positions that were in there forever and were never removed. I would say that some were good, what I call benevolent dictator, and there were some that were not. So just as the arguments regarding term limits, you're limiting the ability of electing somebody who's good in that position. But what this says is that your term limits relate to that position. You can be elected to another position. So, or you could be appointed to something. So it's not saying that once you've served your time with the town, that's it.
Just so I understand, I run for selectman after 3 terms. I can't be a selectman. Can I take a term off and then run again?
The way this is written is no, which is similar to,
And that's what I thought when I read it.
I believe that's
but I
the way it
wanted to
is
make
with the
sure.
president. You can only serve 2 terms. You can't be reelected again after that. You could become vice president,
Yeah,
which somebody said.
Supreme Court Justice,
It'd be-
it's
That's
been
right.
done.
That's right. So the arguments for are to provide opportunities for new and different people to come in as opposed to trying to get people out. There's a certain amount of getting people out, so there is room for new people. But I think that similar to not automatically reappointing new people, appointing people to existing positions that are appointed, that it's a given that you're going to be there forever. That's where I don't have to live with this. I think it's a good government thing.
Yeah, I'm back and forth on this one. You know, I really do respect the good government argument. But the other piece to this, well, there's a couple of things. Number one, we have trouble getting contested elections as it is. And I don't know that whether it would, why that would improve getting a contested election. I'm not certain that that would happen. So that's just a thought. It's not a,
And I would say that if you look at the incumbents in various offices now, the chances of unseating them is unlikely.
right. What I'm saying is that even when a position becomes vacant, there are very few, for the time I've been here at least, there have been very few contested elections. I ran, every time I ran for a school committee, I ran in a contested. The only time I was ever in a contested election was when I ran for selectman. And that was probably the only contested selectman position I ever could be in the time that I've been here. So it's just, I don't know that, and again, I can go both ways on this one, but my concern is, we're creating, more vacancies when there are people that, have committed to it, and do have some commitment to it. I would tell new members of the school committee, I said, if I could give you a recommendation, take a year to listen. Because it'll take you a year, to get your arms around this. And I think it's got to be even more difficult for Board of Selectmen or certainly finance is another one. I was on the finance committee for 2 years, and it was only towards the end of the second year I was going, oh. So I'm concerned about limiting ourselves in how we reach out.
And I suppose, one of the other, and it would just be as a concern. I will have to say first that I support the motion of amendments. Where there might be a question would be, okay, so you have an uncontested election, and there's nobody running for it, and does the Board of Selectmen now have because now it would be an elected position, but can you take somebody who you just has already been there 3 times elected, can you appoint them for a year?
I took out the language that was in originally to include appointed part. Technically, the selectmen in the joint committee with the remaining members of the other committee could do it, but they'd only be appointing them until the next election.
Next election, right.
So it doesn't solve that vacancy issue.
Oh, no, I understand it doesn't solve the issue, but I think it also provides a...
Solves the, you can't find anybody to
Right,
do the
right,
job
right,
for a
right.
year.
If you've got somebody who's willing to stay on until you can find somebody to do the job. So, yeah, that would be...
So is there anybody who would like to make a motion on this?
I don't like term limits. I'm just gonna say, I'm not comfortable with that at all. I think it takes you a long time to figure out what you're doing. And when you finally get good at it, you might be gone. To say you can't come back when you're 60, you made that point. I don't like that idea at all. That you can only serve in your 30s and then you're done and you can't come back. I'm not comfortable with the term limits at all. I just don't see the problem. Like you said, are we solving something there's not really a problem with?
Right, in a small town, somebody might commit as a younger person, and then they're in their 70s, and they're like,
And you know so much more when you're older and you've had
I
experience.
did my 9 years.
You get so much wiser. I don't know why we don't want people on that have so much more experience and knowledge. I think that's a good thing. We want our,
I really agree with you, but I was surprised to see, and it's not totally scientific, but I was surprised to see.
I was very surprised
yeah,
to see that. I'm like,
are
where's this
they
coming
saying
from?
they want change?
But it's also, who knows what positions they're thinking about when they think term limits.
I'm far more concerned about term limits on a nationwide or even a statewide level than I am on a local level. We have a major problem in this country with the way we run the federal government, and lack of term limits is part of it. At the local level, I'm far less concerned about it. I agree, you have a hard enough time getting people to run. If you've served in your 30s, why can't you then serve in your 60s or 70s?
And if you look at our recent history over the last, say, 10 years of this particular charter, I mean, there has been continuous movement throughout Board of Selectmen, throughout. I mean, I think that everybody, in the times that I served on the school committee, everybody served 2 terms, or was at least, well, there's one individual served 1 term, but most of them served 2 terms and then were gone, because that was what they chose to do. I served 2 terms. And it wasn't because, you know, I'm not interested in the schools any longer. It's like, you know, I've done my bit. You know, I know that there are other people that want to contribute.
Steve?
There was, and I read it somewhere, I can't remember where, about the voting, the Z voting. I can't remember the name.
Rank voting?
Ranked choice voting.
Thank you, ranked choice voting. And that would kind of solve that issue, wouldn't it, for elected officials?
No, that, you would still be able to have incumbent state.
No, but if there's more than 1 position, I'm thinking finance board, or if there's 2 positions in the select board or whatever, that if that type of voting is done, there could be turnover.
Not necessarily.
Not
That
necessarily.
that doesn't create turnover. That distributes votes to the way the majority of the town
Okay.
wants. It's not.
Thank you for the clarification.
What if these term limits, instead of 3 terms, what if it was 5 terms? So you're looking at
I
15
think
years.
when you get to that point, why have term limits?
That's kind of where I'm at, yeah.
So I've done my counting, and we won't have a supermajority, so I'd like a motion to not support this.
Motion to not support term limits.
Is there a second?
Second?
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous?
I abstain.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm going to abstain too.
okay,
Just for the record.
all right. So those were, we started with the tough stuff. Not
Can I
that,
revisit one that we voted not to revisit? And I only need 2 minutes.
sure.
As part of the discussion on how many votes you needed in a write-in, it was stated that at the caucus, if it was an uncontested, you got 1 vote. Well, I asked the question the other night, and the answer I got surprised me, is you got 1 vote for everybody that was there. In which case, you got 80 or something, and if you did a petition, you got 42. And I know we discussed that last time around, so
Okay,
that,
that
it may influence
They
our...
didn't collect votes on it, though.
No,
It
so-
has to
but
vote
the-
for
but the
anybody, so my vote would
technicality
be
was-
0.
So
I don't
what
agree
happened
with
is that whoever voted to authorize the chair of the caucus committee to cast a ballot in
Right.
favor of it. So technically, it's 1 vote from all those who voted aye. You don't know how many there is, but clearly
Right.
it's more than 42.
Right.
I think that's right. I don't think it changes my position
Okay.
for what we should be doing, because similar to what we did with term limits, let's not limit any voters' choices of what's going on, that type of thing, so.
And you never know how many people would be at a caucus, so that's really that, we can't define it by the one we just had.
Yeah,
All I'm just saying though is if you run a write-in campaign, you're going to get more than 40 votes. So the only people this addresses is people who did not run a campaign at all, but somebody wrote their name down. And then they decided after the fact whether they were going to accept it based on 3 votes, 4 votes, 6 votes. And I just don't believe that's right. But we did vote not to rediscuss it,
okay.
but I wanted to rediscuss it.
So if they get rediscussing, we technically can't vote to change it because it's not on the ballot, but it technically, because right now it's actually not in the draft either, so.
Okay.
So,
I agree with you though, Gene. After thinking about that one, I think that we need to come to a solution on that. Because I think that I feel strongly that you shouldn't win a position with 3 votes or 2 votes or 1 vote. And I don't know if I agree with that just a week or 2.
Well, I think that only ever happens because nobody ran for it.
and it's.
But I'd rather have somebody appoint somebody based on talent bank forms than to have somebody get the job because 3 people, maybe even jokingly, wrote their name down.
Right.
But we have other people that are still serving that got 10 votes, and
What do I have to do to reopen this?
well, it's not on the agenda. It's not in the draft.
Bring it to public hearing.
Yep.
Okay. I might not.
Well, no, but
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Well, if you don't, this
Board
is,
comments.
What?
You can bring it up during board comments, it's on the agenda.
Yeah, but we can't deliberate on it,
I don't see why not, we're deliberating on the whole thing.
Open meeting law.
because the open meeting law says you put the agenda items on there for what we're actually doing.
People may have chosen to come to participate if they knew it were an agenda
It
item.
was an item that was voted last time, the minutes show that we voted not to do it, and it was pulled out of the meeting because we turned that down in the ranked choice voting.
Like,
So
agenda
we-
items are a core part of open meeting law.
It certainly could go to the public hearing part, we could talk about coming back at that point, so.
Okay.
So the draft charter, I'll just walk you through anything that we had talked about changing and to make sure that I incorporated them. So definitions 1-7, section F, general laws. So wherever it says general laws later, it basically says general laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we added of Massachusetts since last time. Section J of the same section, quorum, talking with town moderator, I added the word simple majority as opposed to super majority. So it's clearly that if you have a 5-member board, you have to have 3 members there, and as we talked about the entire authorized complement, it's basically to be clear that you have to have of the people that are authorized on that committee. Section 2.4, time of meeting. Based on what we talked about last time, we're calling it the first annual town meeting in April or May, and then we're calling it the second annual town meeting in October and November.
What section are you in?
Sorry,
2.4,
2.4,
the first
time of meeting.
paragraph, basically.
So we skipped over
finance committee with.
finance committee.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Finance committee, we didn't make any changes since the last time. Who are town residents registered to vote, we did that last time.
Yep.
And to register to vote in town, there is a definition of whenever we use the term town, it means town of Lunenburg. So we don't have to read Lunenburg again.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah, that's, so.
Where is that?
Under definitions, under section K. K is town of Lunenburg. And town agency is any multi-member body, department, division, or office of the town of Lunenburg.
Okay, so just, I know I'm going out of order, but that means that the one that I had asked on the town manager not holding elective or appointed office in the town, I said of Lunenburg, but you're saying that if you just say of the town, it means Lunenburg.
That's right,
Fair enough,
that's right.
thank you, sorry.
So the time of town meeting, first annual town meeting and second annual town meeting, that means that the current requirement to have 2/3 vote for money articles in a special town meeting will not apply to the second annual meeting, because it's an annual meeting, not a special meeting. The theory being behind that provision of the 2/3 vote was that the average voter should know of when the annual meeting is, and therefore they should show up, and it's a majority vote. If it's special, you may not know about it, it's out of ordinary, you may not be able to plan around it. So that still allows for a regular majority vote for finance.
And are we sure that that's consistent with Mass General Law? MGL calls for the budget to be voted at spring town meeting, or an annual town meeting to be held in the spring, or before the end of the current fiscal year.
This should not
So
Since we have
if you've
the-
got a moneyed article, you're amending the budget after it's been approved, and that's why it requires 2/3.
Well, actually, no, because you could actually, there was a proposal in the last bylaw review to change it to a majority vote. You could have a majority vote. You wouldn't be able to change the taxing appropriation. You could change the budget, but you have to take the money from available funds
It's like a
somewhere.
line item
That happened with
transfer kind of
Article
thing.
4. at the
And didn't we
special town
change,
meeting.
didn't we make that change at the last
We did not.
special?
We
What,
did
they voted it down?
It was pulled before we got there.
Okay.
Okay?
So, but I don't think this affects that. We still have to do the annual town meeting. Under 2-7, initiation of warrant articles, we added the words "or electronic" under section B, referral, cause a written or electronic copy. That's the thing we changed from last time, to be provided to the chairperson of the Finance Committee. 2-10, rules of procedure, adding S. Conduct of town meeting shall govern by the latest version of town meeting time and such other rules and procedures, adding S to that word. This is what's changed from last meeting. Next change is Board of Library Trustees, 3-7.
Are we gonna change
select board?
3-2?
Yes, so 3-2, thank you.
Just a funny editing question. Will you rewrite it with all saying select board, so if the chart is approved, then it reads as it should,
Right.
if the word is what we chose?
Right.
Okay.
There shall be a select board consisting of 5 members elected. Wherever it says Board of Selectmen, it'll say in the select board.
A lot of editing.
Yeah.
Well, it's a 5-hour place.
Searching the password. So 3-7, library trustees. So what,
Just a comment
Yep.
on 3-6. I met with the Board of Health,
oh yes, thank you.
and they're actually very comfortable with the wording as it exists. And in particular, the last sentence says that they shall have all the other powers, duties, and responsibilities given to boards of health by the general laws, which includes their ability to hire a clerk, which they have done. So the clerk is an employee of the Board of Health through the town.
Subject to appropriation. Yeah.
Yeah. So the wording as is, they're fine with it.
Okay. I did a search of a lot of the other towns, and Board of Health language is pretty consistent.
Yeah.
There are many towns that the Board of Health is appointed. I'm not proposing that at this point because of the policy-making part, but it tends to be a bigger community. Although Athol is not a bigger community, they're appointed as well.
But this whole language we added to all the different town employees that work for boards doesn't apply to them. That is what I just heard Mark say.
That's what I'm saying.
The only thing that is different is that his employee is in the collective bargaining unit, so it starts getting into a little bit of a grayer area as
Right.
far as how that is, because there are bumping rights and there are other supervision stuff like that, so. We wouldn't be doing the day-to-day versus policy, because this department, if you had, we use Neshoba Board of Health, which the Board of Health hires, and we pay for it out of our budget. But if we had a full-time employee that we had the provision that the town manager appoints subject to involvement of the Board of Health, then we would probably add that language. But because we have this other entity out there, that language is not appropriate, because it doesn't make sense for the town manager to supervise the Neshoba Board of Health.
But their clerk is an anomaly. I just want to point that out.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
and we're okay with that.
And that's in the state law.
I guess we're okay with it.
Yeah, well, it's kind of similar to the library where
Yeah,
we
okay.
talked about the library director being appointed by the Board of Trustees of the library.
Yep.
Okay.
Similar here with the Board of Health.
So, the wording on the library part is the subtle change to the town manager shall, with the input of the library director, be responsible for hiring and removal of all library employees, except the library director. They're subject to town personnel bylaw policies, collective bargaining, which is already in there, is within the scope. The library director shall fix the salaries and define the duties of other library employees. Labor Council and Town Manager were trying to make these positions as consistent across all departments, except for the school and Board of Health, that there be a supervision process that the town manager is responsible for, with the idea that we're managing it within the departments, but for consistency, it's at the town manager level. So the Board of Library Trustees are meeting, is it next week? I don't know which week it is. But I've already alerted to them to there's going to be a change to their language, and I'm going to send this to them so that they know about it. Planning Board is the next section. One of the things that we talked about was that the Planning Board had a planning director, and now we have a land use director, but the Planning Board supervision is of the planning director's duties, not of the land use director's supervision of building, zoning board of appeals. So I moved it back to town manager. No, I didn't highlight it. Sorry, under appointments. The appointment of the planning director. So I put it, it's no longer in a color because it's the current language. So the planning director is appointed by the town manager, subject to ratification of the planning board. And then I added,
Are you having land use director?
no, so we had land use director before. I've gone back to the planning director, and then I've added a sentence that said, the town manager may appoint, and if necessary, move the planning director as the land use director to oversee land use departments, including building, conservation, and zoning board of appeals. So,
If I'm reading that, that gives her the flexibility to have two positions or one.
right,
Yeah.
the theory being is that we don't want to confuse the planning board's supervision of this position as it relates to the building department and zoning board of appeals and conservation. So that was more of a clarification, just pulling it back at that point. Town clerk, we talked about moving that to the, I will verify that it should be under the town managers and not described out later, but that, I believe that's where it's supposed to be. Town manager, just to clarify on the appointment. Excuse me. So we, as recommended by the town moderator and adopted by us, to the search committee, we are adding one town registered voter who is not a member of any committee or elected position in the town to be appointed by the town moderator. The theory being is that all the others are in the town government. We wanted one town citizen that wasn't in the town government.
Tell me again why an even number works.
That makes, does that, oh, yeah.
Well, you usually try to have, so it will work, because if there's a vote that is, how many are on there now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, including the town moderator. If there's a 3-3 vote, the motion fails under Robert's rules. So therefore, you try to have an odd thing so that you will sort of force a vote to happen. But if somebody's absent in a normal thing, you could have a tie vote then at that point too. So the reality is you're forcing them to come up with a
Better than 3.
better than 3. Yeah. Yeah. Because we talked about adding another one to make it uneven, but then we're making the committee more unwieldy. You okay with that, Amy? Or are you still thinking?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Well, it's also just,
the skeptic in me says you can word something so that it makes it pass. I mean, you can make a motion that says, well, you know, I move that we don't hire this person, and then it fails, so you do hire him. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think reality is you have to, I mean, they're not making the hiring decision, they're sending these people on to the select.
Well, but that's what I mean.
Right, I mean,
yeah,
What
I'm
do you
not,
send
I'm
them
not
on?
sure, I'm not sure it's gonna fail on I'd like to, you know, if we're including somebody from the public in it, if it was excluding, if it was pulling that out, I think that there would be a fight, but I think putting somebody in.
Okay.
I'm not that I put a bet on it, but
Okay. My only point was that an even number is a problem.
Yeah, I think it is if they were making the decision to offer them the position. But I think in a case of a screening committee, it could also be that, well, we tied on this one, but we thought we'd send it forward anyway. Just letting you know that we,
And then
I've never sat on a screening committee, so I don't know, does it now?
it's,
You wouldn't necessarily describe your vote. You would simply say, this is the recommended candidate, or these are the 3 finalists, or whatever.
and if you have a tie vote, then that really calls into question of whether you should be passing that person on. If you've got other candidates as well, even not that. So clarifying on page 26, which is a few paragraphs after that, where it says the town manager need not be a resident of the town or of the Commonwealth. The town manager shall not have served in an elected or appointed office in the town government. If it just said in town government, I'd be concerned, but since it's that town, that refers back to Lunenburg. So, powers and duties.
Everything, all at once.
Well, that was one of the concern, was that, were we intending to have the town manager supervise and evaluate every employee in town? I was like, no, that's not the intent, and that my original wording went beyond. So we basically went back to, because there is language. Let's see, there is language requiring that the town manager assure that there be evaluations being done, and I believe that that's in every collective bargaining agreement now, and it should be, I believe, is in the salary administration plan as well as that. So, under I, this is where we have full jurisdiction subject to written policy over the rental use, maintenance, and repair of all town facilities. We had said subject, I didn't put something in here that we talked about subject to policy. And I can't remember what our discussion was subject to policy. Whose policies? Anybody remember that?
It's in here, subject to
It
written
says
policy.
subject to written policies in the beginning of the sentence. To have full jurisdiction, subject
Oh,
to
excuse
written
me, all right,
policies.
yep, all right. So I did include it, but I didn't highlight that, so I
I
want to make
think
sure.
that's qualifying the full jurisdiction part.
Right, okay. So then that's there, I wanted to.
Blessing.
Okay, never mind. It was day-to-day affairs. Actually, should the cemetery commission be listed there?
Which section?
Aye. Or am I misreading it?
No, she is,
She does the day-to-day, but she doesn't do the
she's responsible for the maintenance repair of the cemeteries.
Okay.
Yeah. Cemetery, parks, and sewer.
Okay.
Let's see, next section that changed is the removal process. And I looked at 2 or 3 different towns, and I looked at what the moderator said. So this is 4-5, subsection B, within 5 days, the town, if there's a resolution to remove the town manager may request a public hearing, filing it with the Board of Selectmen and the town clerk, who shall immediately notify the moderator. The hearing date, then we've added in, the town moderator shall preside over the hearing, so the selectmen don't have to. We've added at any such hearing, the reason for the removal shall first be read aloud. The town manager shall have the right to respond either personally or through counsel. The Board of Selectmen and the town manager shall have the right to call and cross-examine witnesses and subpoena any town records. So that's getting to what Tim was talking about, having some procedure that's there and being clear that counsel is there, that kind of thing. So this seemed to be a little bit clearer to give more rights for everybody involved.
Maybe we'll put an E on cross-examination.
Yeah. Spell check.
Again, I'm assuming the language will say select board.
Yes, yeah. 5-1, subsection B, last sentence. Subsection A, sorry. Striking the word or. That was just English language. No function assigned by the chapter to a particular town agency may be discontinued unless the charter specifically so provides. Well, maybe it's supposed to be there. No function assigned by
Where are
this
you?
charter, subsection, so 5-1, subsection B, bylaws.
I have subsection A bylaws.
Sorry, subsection A, bylaws.
Okay.
Last clause, provided however no function assigned by this charter to a particular town agency may be discontinued, and I'll read it the way it was, or, and it should be a comma, or unless this charter specifically so provides, assigned to any other town agency.
I think the change we talked about last time was to add the comma.
Add the comma, okay, not the, okay, great. That's the, Section 7-8, procedures governing multiple member bodies.
There's no change in 5.3?
5.3, no, there wasn't any change from
Okay.
last week. So, 7-8 procedures, subsection B agendas for town council, adding the word except in emergency. And then as we described last week, at least 48 hours, not including Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays.
Where is accepting emergencies being inserted?
B agendas,
Yep.
just at the beginning of that one sentence, except in an emergency.
Okay.
And then the emergency is defined, there's definitions of what that is. Do
Within
we
the
put
general
that,
laws.
or do we just, so that people understand what emergency means?
So this whole paragraph,
Because they clearly define an example, like what an emergency would be,
Right.
because you
What
can't.
would an emergency be?
Yeah, it's under the definitions, they do have emergency. Sudden unexpected unforeseen happening of any occurrence or condition. Which
That's it.
necessitates immediate
Yeah.
action.
yeah, that would be consistent with state law.
Does that matter? Okay.
Yeah. And then, subsection C, rules and minutes. Each member body shall determine its own rules and order of business unless otherwise provided by this charter, bylaws, or by general law. Before it said by law, which somebody may interpret bylaws, and so it just added everything in case somebody determines it's different.
Is there an extra journal in there?
Yes, we're keeping minutes, cross out a journal.
And were you adding general law? You were adding little g and big G?
No, it's, little g is for a specific act and resolve that relates to a community, as opposed to, I guess you could have a general law, but this would really relate to.
So you're doing big G?
Big G,
Okay.
yeah. Page 48. Removals and suspensions.
Co-terminus.
Co-terminus, not conterminus. We got rid of that in. And that's it. We've taken out term limits.
And in 7-11, where you, it shall be the duty of the town manager to provisions of the charter and the town general laws. I wondered if we wanted to add, and also general laws to scale it all the way up.
No, we really don't want the town manager to enforce the general laws, because that's a really big duty. I would say the focus is the charter and town general bylaws.
It's just saying to see that they're followed, not to enforce them. So to see that laws are followed, I would include all laws. Just in terms of like general laws.
But
maybe things
the
that
general
we-
laws would include divorce, it would include traffic laws, it would include a
Okay.
lot of other things like that.
State law.
The theory about this really is something
Okay.
that is within the bodies of the bylaw and the charter that the town actually sees on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
In most of those other general laws, there is a provision for enforcement. Here, there really
Anyways,
isn't. So, that being said, I would like to have us vote to approve this charter as the draft plan to move forward.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
aye.
So Katie, anybody else? Okay. So, that being said, we need to draft a charter review report. I'm just going to read out some of the things I started, and I'm hoping that there may be somebody that may be willing to take a first stab. I can send this. So one section was what we considered but is not included. So representative town meeting, minimum vote requirements, now we have term limits. So we considered them and we voted not to. There should be language that says that the current charter generally works, because I believe it does, and I think most of us do, but we're trying to improve it. It relates to changes in state laws, such as the open meeting law for the 24 to 48 hours. Changes based on operations and reorganization. The land use department was reorganized, so we're acknowledging that. Areas that needed clarification, the town manager dismissal process, elected board staff supervision by the town manager. The theory that we're moving to additional professional oversight by the town manager. Then certainly select board and appointed town clerk need some language on some of that. And since we already have some of the survey language on the town clerk, we may be able to do that. Other items that, so I see there's going to be two reports. One that needs to be the draft report based on this current draft and inviting people to come to meetings and talk about that type of thing. And then there'll be a final report if we vote to change anything as we go through that. We don't need to write the report tonight, but is there anything else that jumps out at anybody?
No, I'd take a stab at it, but I have to take a stab at the budget.
Yeah, I would say you've got some things to do. I will take a stab at it and we can do some wordsmithing on some of this type of thing. Outreach efforts, town website, public hearings. So clearly, once this is finalized, we will post it on the town website.
I think once it's posted, I think that should be posted with an invitation to the public hearing.
Yeah. So when should we have the public hearing?
Just a quick question on the public hearing. I hope that we would have it televised. So it would have to be, based on the availability of the room and the, that would be useful.
And the only place that it can be televised from.
Is John?
Live.
That's a research TriCaster. Sorry.
That
That's just the
can
friendly comment.
easily be set up is the selectmen's meeting room. All right, so the theory being that we want to give 2 weeks' notice, at least.
Yep.
So if we were able to get something, let me just,
Count.
so the first week of, like Wednesday the 4th,
The first and third Wednesday is, the first Wednesday is school committee.
They use town hall.
Yeah.
I'd be afraid that they may want to come as well, and I wouldn't want to restrict
Right.
them, so I'd try to want to pick a night that wouldn't restrict.
But then you'd have to do Friday.
so the,
There's
Or,
meetings every-
or tonight, a Wednesday that
Yeah.
is our night.
So
would be more fair.
Thursday the 5th.
Oh,
No FinCom.
no, we'll be done.
wow.
Well, we have to have our public hearing on March 29th.
Our report is due on the 5th,
Yeah,
so we won't be meeting.
no,
Okay. So we'll look at the Thursday the 5th, possibly
but I don't know who we took this, well, we won't be swapping with anybody because nobody else will.
Wednesday the 11th. If I go back to last month's meeting schedule. We often conflicted with the zoning board of appeals, but maybe I can work with them to not schedule anything. Let's go to April, see what happens. There's nothing scheduled yet in April.
So we're putting it in for the 5th, which the
The 5th.
11th as an alternate?
Yep.
I will
Now,
be
the warrant
unable-
goes to the printer on the 9th. If that matters.
Well, no, because we'll be working off the draft that was already posted online.
Do you mean April 9th?
So April
April
9th.
9th, the warrant goes to the printer.
So theoretically, April 9th to printer.
So
we might have-
At the 5th.
So part of what I'm going to ask, does anyone remember the wording of the article? Because I don't believe that we have to talk about what gets published to the public in the warrant versus what's in the article. Because the technical legal way you could do it is to see if the
As a
town vote.
placeholder in the article that,
Well, no, the legal way to actually have an official article is say, see if the town will vote to amend the charter as provided in the version at the town clerk's office
okay,
and posted on the website.
okay.
Legally, that's enough notice to the public. That's the way they often do zoning articles,
Okay.
unless they choose to include everything.
Okay.
If I were to do that, I would say, providing for the appointment of the town clerk, enhancing the town manager's appointment authority, it's the major items that we would have, so that the people would have at least an indication of what are the major changes, making typographical and grammatical errors, changes, things like that. So I'm going to find out what the article was, the last article, because if we can do that, we can talk to the legal counsel whether we can make a change before April 9th.
Because there has to be a point where the public knows what's there and
Well,
what stays and what they're
what's the
voting on.
first version, and then we still can have another change to do it before we go into town meeting and say, here's what we're coming to you for, as long as it doesn't dramatically change.
And then basically, does the bylaw committee meet every year, or is it
No,
appointed?
that's every 5 years.
All right, so,
We're going to have to, thank you. So we're going to have, ideally, we should have the bylaw that relates to the annual town meeting, the second town meeting. Is that what you were getting to?
well, yeah, I was like, at what point is that, do you have to, it's not a town meeting thing to appoint a bylaw committee?
No, we could come up with, or I could come up with an amendment to that bylaw that is under the town meeting, and we can say then the town will meet in whatever time. I can talk to the town manager what that second meeting would be, and propose that as another article to follow the charter. And we pass over it if the charter didn't pass.
I can't say for sure, but I feel like I read someplace that you bring the charter and it's pass or fail, like it can't be changed.
Right.
I don't know what's triggering that, but
Yeah,
for some reason
it's a yes/no vote by town meeting, but we've got the ability to change what we bring to town meeting.
and that can, there's,
The warrant itself doesn't have to be the document.
no, not just so, yeah, no, I'll have to go back, yeah.
No.
I just don't like the idea of making last minute changes, like it just,
No, that's why we're meeting on the 5th, and therefore, we voted it now. And this is what has to go to the warrant now. But if we, at the public hearing, we see that there's some substantial change that we should make, we should then we will have the ability to do it.
And I don't necessarily see a problem with, again, if this gets voted down at town meeting, then,
Come back in the fall.
come to a special town meeting in the fall.
Yep.
And with any changes that were based on anything that happened at
Well,
town
for that matter, the town meeting could, by an article, not have to do a whole new charter. Well, all right, that's it, yeah, right, if it didn't pass, we come back. All right, so we've got the hearing date. Outreach. Suggestions for outreach beyond a public hearing.
I don't know what happened 10 years ago.
Should there be an article in the ledger? Which,
Press, yeah. Are people willing to be interviewed? Is anybody not willing to be interviewed?
No?
Because we'd like to have different people in press, okay. I would also say that when we get the final version, that the committees that you went and talked to, we will send this out to them again, and I would ask you to reach out to them again and say, all right, your section may not have changed, please look at the entire charter because it may affect you. Or your section changed, please come and talk.
so my question to follow up on that is, what the draft that we've come up with now, can we begin to share that with our committees?
Not until we get the wording of select board and town clerk and everything else like that, but as soon as the version goes out, what I will do is I will get that out to people within a few days. And I would like you to look at it one more time. It will be a red line version because we want to let people know what's going on changing, to make sure that I didn't screw anything up on it. Not that we're going to deliberate on it, but you can say, we voted to do this, you didn't do that correctly, please correct it. That's not deliberating. Unless you come up with something different and you want to change something, that is deliberating. We can't do that. But once we have that, then we will say, yes, please share this with your committee. And it doesn't hurt to get it out there several times.
And then I would just be prepared that there is an interview or an article in the Lunenburg Ledger, that then we have to be prepared to respond to the article in the Lunenburg Ledger as to whether the points were.
Were appropriately recorded. That's
I mean,
important.
it has.
Yeah, but generally, in my dealings with the ledger, I've written the article and they just put it in with all my
Okay,
mistakes.
then, yeah.
So if we were to put in an article,
That would,
one of us would draft the article
Yeah.
and put it in, and they just copy and paste.
yeah. That's
They-
safer.
Rarely,
That's a good idea to do that.
if you provide it. And a picture, we should have a picture of all of us smiling.
So, to get this out to the various committees, I'm looking at the calendar for April, so if I were to go to the school committee on their second meeting of April, which is the 18th, we would have all the language nailed down by then.
You want it before that because we're going to have the hearing on the 5th.
Okay.
So today's the 14th. You will have it, I've got to give myself the weekend. You will have it by the end of the day on Sunday, the 18th. So the theory being,
I could go for the April 4th meeting.
I think, well, that, or you could just basically,
when is their second meeting in March?
That
Next
would
Wednesday.
make,
The 21st?
what's today? Today is the 14th.
yeah, the plan.
21st.
So you may want to outreach to them to see if they could put that on the agenda for the 21st. So any of your boards that are going to have meetings next week, if they want to discuss it, the sooner they can discuss it and say, we're fine, we don't need to go to the public hearing, we've got these questions, we'd like to come to the public hearing. Whatever we can have for information before the public hearing, that's not the only time people get to comment. So we'll accept written comments and people can make comments ahead of time. So I'll get the draft out, the final draft out on the 18th, and you can start sending it to your committees as soon as you get it.
But we could contact our board to say there's a draft coming out, if you want to discuss it.
Please put it on your
Come
agenda.
to the,
Yeah.
yeah, you can discuss
No,
it
but
at the meeting
before-
or come to public hearing, yeah.
Okay, so if anybody's meeting on the, right,
Because a lot of them won't meet before then.
well, and then they'll have, if they meet weekly, they can have a meeting the next week.
Can the draft be available as a link, like on the website, just so that anybody on any committee does it?
Yeah, that's the goal.
Okay,
Yeah,
so that'll be.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So we will, today is the 14th, we will meet again on the 28th. The hearing on the 5th.
Why will we meet on the meeting?
We will hold that as a meeting date in case we need it.
Okay.
Good point. Don't meet if we don't need to. And then we'll meet on the hearing on the 5th. Hold the 11th and the 25th of April for meetings, press opportunities.
Can you give me those dates, I'm sorry, one more time, in April?
The 11th and 25th, which are the second and third Wednesdays.
What are those two dates?
Hold for possible discussions. The 25th really would be the meeting to prepare for town meeting, which is the following week, May 5th,
It's almost nice weather.
which is also Cinco de Mayo Day.
Yeah, I should let you know that unfortunately I will not be available
On the 25th?
at town, I will not be here for town meeting.
There's no proxy voting.
There goes the point.
I've been hired to perform on the 11th of April, so I
Okay.
can't do that, but I can do the 5th, just so you know.
Yeah, the 5th will be the most important if we can actually have it in time. I think that would be a good time, because that's sooner than later. It's literally a month before town meeting. That's a good time to have public.
Is this-
I'm
Okay,
mostly just, I'm impressed that there's an article on this town meeting. I didn't see this here.
well,
Be a little faith.
so, well, see, part of my philosophy of being a chair is sometimes to allow a lot of mess. And I think we probably had a little too much mess. But that being said, is that sometimes it's the creative process and that you start thinking, well, how does it all play together? And I think us reading through the article, each article by article, made us think different things. And then when you actually have the draft language, I have sent this to town council with saying that it was coming tonight. And then now when we have the final thing, I will send it to him for a full legal review, because there may be some changes that he may come up with saying you really need to change this language to be more clear, or we've already incorporated his top level items, but now that we've made some changes, we may have had some other interactions. So we'll get that comment as well. So I think we've taken care of action items before next meeting. We've continued to communicate with the boards. Is there any public comment? And we've already talked about our meeting schedule.
We didn't do board comment?
Oh, board comment, thank you.
Okay, so I guess this is the only place that I can shoehorn that discussion in, and I just think there's a little bit of new data. If if the committee still believes that they don't want to discuss it further, I'll leave it alone. But I wanted to see if, number one, if there's any other place to do this in the next 10 years, or if we're stuck with it if we don't get it in here. Because I feel more strongly about it as time goes on. And just as I don't know who she sent it to, Phyllis, who presented it the first time, sent a note to somebody, I don't know who it was, all of us, okay, that she was disappointed in our decision. And I went back and looked at the minutes, and I was going to say something about the minutes, but they did reflect exactly what we said. But what we said was that the caucus only gets registered as one vote, and so therefore one vote was good enough. When I found out it's really, technically, it's still cast by the moderator, not the moderator, the chair of the caucus committee, but it amounts to more than the number that are required on the agenda, on the petition. I think that there's a difference between running a write-in campaign and having someone who's not campaigned at all have their name put on a ballot. So I don't know whether I could take a straw vote to see if it's worth fighting, or whether...
Well, I'll allow a certain amount of discussion at this point. One of the things I'd say is that at the end of the caucus on Monday, there wasn't a nominee for the planning board. And the chair of the caucus committee, does anyone want to volunteer for that committee?
Right.
At that point, they could have put somebody onto that committee with the chair and the 3 votes. They would not call for a vote.
Do you think they would have called for a vote? I was wondering how they would have handled that.
Because they actually had the ability to fill vacancies. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but it doesn't require it to come back for a ballot, because it's not a nomination at that point. But for when I did the vote, I didn't vote based on it was 80 or 40 or anything else like that. I did the vote based on, okay, there's nobody running, 10 voters, 38 voters. There's sometimes the caucus has 20 people at the caucus.
No, understood.
So you have 38 vote, so when do you say there's enough voters in the town that pick somebody, whether they were in for it or not? And the fact is, there have been times when people were nominated and they said, no, I'm not interested. If somebody's interested, they're effectively voting, volunteering to be there. I don't think that there's a problem. I mean, and then we go back to this, if somebody got elected and you don't like what they're doing, you could do a recall. That's a bad way to manage elected officials, but
Well, how do the who sets the rules for the caucus? Because it's not in the charter.
it's state law. I think it's a citizen party thing.
Does the town clerk run that meeting?
No.
It's a citizens party committee, who then at the end, because there's no term limits, get reelected. And in fact, it's inherited, the Binghams have held it for several
Multi-generational.
years, that type of thing. But the fact is, it's all, registered voters can go there, and it's majority vote. It's no minimum vote, that, if you have 10 people show up for the caucus and there's a contest, then, 6 versus 4.
Everybody that shows up gets nominated.
Can we just add it to our agenda for the 28th?
Well, let's do a straw vote. Do people, because the vote was, sorry.
No, that's okay. Straw vote, I would basically not support that, but I would support it being brought up at public hearing.
At a public hearing.
Yeah, at the public hearing. But I'm not sure that,
So you're not recommending that we do something to change our,
charter right now.
No.
That would be my straw.
so let me, straw vote, who would want to change the charter to put a limit on the number of votes to require a minimum number of votes on a write-in vote? One,
I knew open to the conversation.
Is this something that we could do a survey?
Are we deliberating?
I'm being flexible, trying to have an indication of whether we have enough interest here of this committee to seriously move it forward as opposed to bring it to public hearing.
As a non-agenda item, I won't contribute.
Okay.
See, I didn't ask for that, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I asked for a straw vote on whether it's worth putting it on the next agenda, not whether it's worth changing it tonight.
Okay. Straw vote of whether, that's not deliberating. Straw vote to put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
I agree.
Sure.
Are those in favor?
Sure.
When does this have to be in?
Well, our next meeting is going to be after
For the,
the submission of the article. So it's not going to be in the submission of the article. So, all right, so those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed? And you're abstaining?
Yeah.
So it doesn't pass.
Okay.
Fair enough.
So a non-deliberated straw vote.
It's very technical.
It's skating on thin ice here, so. Okay,
Like
any
2 inches.
other board
Skate fast.
comment? Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Sorry,
Sorry,
I missed my chance. I was going to
I didn't
comment.
recognize that vote yet. Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say in terms of not approving the draft, it would just be to be consistent with the fact that I didn't agree with the appointed town clerk, which obviously will be in the draft, since I'm not adversarial towards 95% of what we've done and agree with all of that work, but to be consistent with the fact that I don't agree with a major change. I can't support the final draft, including the major change. And so that was just where that came from.
Okay. I will now recognize the vote. The meeting is adjourned at 8:37. Thank you all.